So, the concept of using leverage when it comes to purchasing valuable assets is really not all that alien as it may seem, because you've probably used leverage in the form of student loans, financing your education. You've also probably used leverage when it came to buying your house in the form of a mortgage loan. If you own a business, you've probably used leverage in the form of a business loan or business line of credit to finance the expansion of your business. In leveraged index arbitrage, you're using the bank's capital to purchase a cash value life insurance policy. So it's not as foreign a concept as you may initially felt it was. So when it comes to financing life insurance premiums, there are several different lending platforms to choose from. For the sake of this webinar, we'll discuss two different ways to finance. The first one is called first dollar financing. So in this offering, the client borrows the life insurance premium from the bank, and the bank pays 100% of the premium to the life insurance policy. The client then pays the bank interest only on that loan. Now, at some point, usually somewhere between year 11 to year 20, the appreciated cash value of that life insurance policy pays off the loan to the bank in full, at which time the client could begin taking tax-free distributions in the form of retirement income from the policy values. Now, the client does not necessarily need to take tax-free income from the policy value. They could use the life insurance policy for its original intended purpose, which is the death benefit, and just keep that policy in force all the way until end of life and let the death benefit pay out tax-free to their beneficiaries. And that is typically how we design policies for extremely wealthy families, where Generation 2 is going to be subject to extremely high estate taxes. If that is not the case, and the client is using leveraged index arbitrage and the life insurance policy cash value as an alternative asset class, and they want to draw down tax-free retirement income from this asset class, they can begin doing so once the bank loan is paid off and they decide they no longer need such a large death benefit. Our algorithmic-based software will calculate how much that client can draw down tax-free income without extinguishing 100% of the policy's cash value, and at end of life, the life insurance policy will still pay out that tax-free death benefit to the client's beneficiary. So the benefits of this offering include the downside protection of the 0% floor. Introducing the bank's leverage increases the fund's compound growth because the client has substantially more premium dollars entering the contract, compounding over time. That growth is tax-free, and if they decide that they want to take retirement income drawdowns from the policy values, those income drawdowns are also tax-free. And of course, it is a life insurance policy, which includes a tax-free death benefit. So first dollar financing is one of several different lending platforms within the leveraged index arbitrage offering. Another one of several different lending platforms is called partial equity interest accrual. In this model, instead of the bank paying 100% of the policy premium, the bank would pay 80% of the policy premium, and the client, instead of making interest-only payments to the bank, would pay 20% of the policy premium. And the interest due on that loan balance would be accrued. And again, these are only two of several different lending platforms offered within the leveraged index arbitrage offering. So let's take a look at a case study here. This is a male age 55, and we're going to model the first dollar financing platform. Now, this case study may be larger or smaller than what we would design for you, but these numbers will give you a general understanding of the basic concept. So in this model, we have the bank funding 100% of the policy premium, which is $500,000 per year for a period of 10 years. The client would then pay the interest due each year on that cumulative loan balance, and they would also be required to post some outside collateral. The collateral numbers in this model are assuming that the client is posting a marketable securities account as their outside collateral. Now, depending on the lender that we use, some lenders will allow the client to keep their securities managed by their current money manager and just post that portfolio as collateral, whereas other lenders will require that the client move those securities to be managed by the lender. We even have some lenders that will allow the client to post real estate equity as collateral. So each client is different, each lender has different lending terms, and each insurance carrier has different requirements as well. So in this depiction here, we are showing the bank being paid off by the policy values in year 15. And starting the very next year in policy year 16, the client would be 70 years old, and we are showing annual drawdowns of $115,000 in tax-free retirement income. And again, because this is a life insurance policy, we do have an ongoing death benefit that starts to decline, obviously, because we are drawing down retirement income from the policy values. Now, if I remove all the red boxes and yellow arrows here, we see in column 10 a hypothetical index credit. And what that means is the numbers shown on the screen assume that the S&P 500 produces a 5.21% index credit each year. Now, the compliance departments and the insurance industry regulators require that the insurance companies use an assumption no greater than this index credit. And this assumption is derived by calculating the average of every 25-year window over the last 65 years. However, there's one thing we know, and that is average returns are very different than actual returns. There's definitely going to be volatility, and that volatility, whether it happens earlier in the 40-year sequence or later in the 40-year sequence, is going to have a major effect on the actual financial outcomes. So what our firm did is we built our own proprietary in-house software where we can backtest literally 121 different 40-year historical periods of S&P 500 performance. So we believe this helps the client understand that there is going to be a potential range of outcomes depending on how the market performs. So let's take a look at how we built our backtesting software. So this 40-year sequence starts on January 1st, 1970, and then rolls forward 40 years with an endpoint of December 31st, 2009. During this particular 40-year period, the compound annual growth rate of the S&P 500 was 6.43%. But then we said, what if a client started just 1 month later in the same year, 1970? Well, that would have created an entirely different set of 40 12-month segments. So we said, well, let's model that with a start point of, say, February 1st in the same year, 1970. Now, if we roll forward 40 years, that would put an end point of January 31st, 2010. And then we said, let's continue this process, and let's start with a start date of March 1st, 1970, and then April 1st, then May 1st, then June 1st. And we ran these 40-year sequences all the way up until the end of 2019. And that created literally 121 different actual historical 40-year periods of S&P 500 performance. We then tagged the best 40-year period, or the 40-year period that produced the best compounded annual growth rate out of those 121 different 40-year periods. And then we also tagged the worst 40-year period. And then our software built a proxy, in other words, a hypothetical synthetic asset that behaves very similar to the actual real-world IUL. And the reason we did this is we wanted our clients to understand how volatility can affect long-term outcomes, as well as how the floor and the cap and the tax treatment and the fees and the charges and all of these other variables can affect the long-term financial outcome. So this is the 40-year period that produced the worst compounded annual growth rate out of those 121 different 40-year periods. As we see here, these are the S&P 500 returns that correspond with each one of these years. This particular 40-year sequence started on October 1st, 1971, and then continued through the end of September of 2010. Again, this is the worst 40-year period that we analyzed. And what we see here is in the first 10 years of this 40-year sequence, there were 4 negative returning S&P years. So from a sequence of return standpoint, this was a pretty awful first 10 years of this 40-year sequence. We then applied a 0% floor and a 10% cap. We also imported the charges from the life insurance carrier illustration. Now, some of these real-world IUL products have a multiplier bonus feature with an associated asset-based charge. So the asset-based charge is a percentage that is applied to the accumulated value. Our software then calculates what those asset-based charges would have been based on this particular backtested set of returns, and our software also imports the carrier's multiplier bonus feature schedule. So here's how this multiplier offering works. So in column 5 here, we see in this particular year, the S&P produced a 27.04% return. The index credit would have hit the 10% cap, which is the maximum allowable return in that given year. And in column 7, the multiplier bonus factor is 1.99. So we would take the after floor, after cap return, in this case 10%, multiplied by 1.99, which would equal 19.90%. So in this particular year, the effective index credit would have been 19.90%. Now, in a year wherein the S&P 500 produced a negative return, again, if you look in column 5 there, in that year, the S&P produced a negative 15.51% return. Because of the 0% floor, you would not experience a 15% loss. you would experience a 0% index credit. Now, the multiplier bonus in that year is 1.99. However, 0% times 1.99 is still 0%. So in that given year, the effective index credit would have still been 0, despite the multiplier bonus factor. However, in that year, the client would still be charged that multiplier bonus associated asset-based charge. So in this case study, in this particular year, the standard charges plus the multiplier asset-based charges would have totaled $2.1 million in charges in that year. Now, because in that particular year, the index credit was 0, that $2.1 million charge would come out of the accumulated value. So if this were a real world IUL, and in that year the policy experienced a 0% index credit, the policy cash value would actually decrease by $2.1 million in that given year because of the standard charges as well as the asset-based charges. Now, the question is, with the multiplier bonus, is the additional expense of the multiplier bonus really worth it? Now, the reality is, in each given year, the client can elect to buy the multiplier bonus feature and accept the additional asset-based charges, or they can decide to not buy the multiplier bonus feature and not accept the additional charges. Obviously, they have to do that at the beginning of each year. So one of the major values of working with us and utilizing this proprietary software is that we can actually backtest the multiplier proposition to see how it would have worked in boom times as well as during times of negative volatility. So this graph here shows you the range of outcomes based on this particular case study and based on opting in for the multiplier bonus feature. This blue line represents the values that were taken right out of the life insurance carrier illustration, assuming a static return of 5.21% every single year. The green dashed line represents the simulated account values in our proxy during the period of the best S&P 500 compounded annual growth rate, and the green dotted line represents the accumulated value in our proxy during the worst 40-year period. However, if we look at the total income drawdown allowable in each one of those three different depictions, in fact, let me blow this up for you here, the top line there shows that the client could have drawn down $2.89 million in total income drawdowns under the assumption that the index returned 5.21% static every single year. In the best 40-year period that we analyzed, they could have pulled down $9.67 million in total income drawdowns. And during the worst 40-year period that we analyzed, they could have drawn down $6.39 million. So again, we think that it is a prudent thing to do in a more transparent way to explain to a client how this actually works by showing them a range of potential outcomes. We also believe that the client should see what their other alternative options are. So for example, if they didn't participate in the leverage index arbitrage platform, what else could they have contributed the same dollar amount to? So our software builds a hypothetical non-insurance-based investment account, that's what we have in the blue there, which is a combination of back-tested returns of equities and bonds. For the equities returns, we are using historical S&P 500 returns, and for the bond returns, we are using historical 10-year T-bond returns. And we're assuming an allocation of 70% of the portfolio being in equities and 30% being in bonds. As we see here, during the best 40-year period, we could draw down substantially more income from the first dollar financing proxy. And the reason is that even though we were drawing down the same annual income in both the first dollar financing proxy and the equities and bonds account, you see here at the bottom, the equities and bonds account was drawn down to 0 about 2/3 of the way through this 40-year period. Again, this was during the best 40-year period that we analyze. On the right side of the screen is the worst 40-year period that we analyze, and we drew down the same annual income from both of those assets. However, the equities and bonds account, again, that's the blue line there, got drawn down to below $600,000 by the end of that 40-year period, whereas the first dollar financing proxy had almost triple that account value at the end of that 40-year period. So if we compare the first dollar financing proxy to the non-insurance-based equities and bonds account, here's what it looks like in both the static time as well as the two back-tested times, the best 40 and the worst 40. With the same $2 million in total client contribution, under the static 5.21% annual return, the first dollar financing account produced a total of $4.3 million in value, and that is the total income drawn down plus the end of year 40's account value. The equities and bonds account only produced a $3.3 million total economic benefit. When we look at the worst 40-year period that we analyzed, the first dollar financing program produced a total of $7.9 million in total economic benefit versus only $6.9 million in the equities and bonds account, and during the best 40-year period, $18.6 million in total benefit versus $4.8 million in benefit. Now, if we look at the two blue boxes on the bottom right-hand corner of the screen there, you may look at those values and say, well, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. Why is it that the equities and bonds account produced a worse outcome during the best 40-year period than it did during the worst 40-year period? Well, the reason is that during the best 40-year period, we modeled pulling down the same annual income as the first dollar financing proxy. In both the best 40-year period and the worst 40-year period, we drew down 8% of the overall account value in each given year. Well, because we were pulling down a larger annual income during the best 40-year period, the equities and bonds account got drawn down to literally zero about 2/3 of the way through that 40-year period, which is why the total economic benefit was actually worse for the equities and bonds account during the best 40-year period than the worst 40-year period. So this is one of the reasons why our clients love the benefits of the leverage index arbitrage offering, is that it basically increases their certainty in terms of outcomes, largely due to that 0% floor. But increasing certainty goes far beyond just the risk mitigation feature of the 0% floor. So to find out more about how this platform increases a client's certainty, go ahead and watch the next video.